Chapter 33, Market Tavern. Reyes loved to fly. He felt as if it was something that had been missing from most of his life, and now he knew how to do it. He wanted to make the most of it. He loved to soar above the streets and houses of the city, to be able to look down on the people below and watch them as they went about their business. He felt born to fly. When flying alone, as he was today, he made sure to avoid places where other harpies gathered. He skirted entire areas, doing his best to fly low and remain unnoticed. A leather skirt might help hide his gender, but his wings were still a bit of a giveaway. He caught sight of the blue glow as it suddenly appeared in front of him, just moments before he hit it. There was a loud thump, and he was sent tumbling down towards the ground. For a few vital seconds, Reyes spun out of control. He really hadn't been all that high to begin with, but even a fall from where he had been could prove fatal if he should hit the ground head first. At the very least, it was going to be painful. Fortunately, he was able to gather his wits quickly enough to correct his fall. He redeployed his wings and used them to turn his headlong descent into a gentle glide. The eye hadn't been so lucky. It was knocked out of the sky like a rock and smashed into the street below amidst a crowd of elves who were busy scattering to get out of the way. Reyes shook his head, trying to clear it. He was feeling a little stunned by the experience. He landed in the middle of the street, taking a moment to recover. No one had been injured by the falling eye, but nevertheless the elves closest to Reyes didn't look all that impressed. A few were giving Reyes some definite dirty looks. As Reyes stood there, wondering what to do, he couldn't help but think that it had to be against the law to knock one of these things out of the air, even by accident. He tried to remember exactly what had happened. Had he been underneath the eye when he had hit it, in which case the eye would most likely have seen him, or had he hit it from above? Another thing that went through Reyes' mind was just how easy it had been to knock the eye out of commission. He could see it now, lying on the ground, unmoving. It was definitely dead. Considering how few harpies ever walked anywhere, and how many there were in the city at the moment, Reyes couldn't help thinking that there would have to be collisions of this sort nearly every day. Reyes had never heard of any eyes getting knocked out of the sky before, but somehow it didn't feel like the sort of thing the elves would admit to. He was also sure that the elves wouldn't treat him too kindly if they so much as suspected that he was the one who had knocked this eye out of the sky. About a minute after he had landed, Reyes took to the air again, thinking it best not to hang around. Still feeling a little bit shaken, Reyes landed on the roof of a butcher's shop located opposite the Market Tavern. He had met Jorvis in there once before, and he hoped Jorvis would be there again today. This would be the 6th inn Reyes had checked this day. From the outside, it looked like the same small building that he remembered from last time. There was an upper story, but the tavern had no rooms to let out to its customers. If anything, it did look a little bit newer than it had last time Reyes had been there, but that seemed to owe more to the building's new paint job, rather than to any actual renovation. Reyes entered the inn through the main doors, and almost immediately could feel the eyes of all the other clientele suddenly watching him. Then they returned to what they had been doing. The barman returned to cleaning some of the glasses, the drunk, sitting by the fire, lolled in his chair, resting his head against the wall, and began to snore. The young lovers sitting at the table returned to staring admiringly into each other's eyes as they held hands on the tabletop. This bar was intended as a place that shoppers might visit in order to take a refreshing drink before continuing with their shopping. The place did a brisk but fairly sparse trade until night fell and the market closed. That was when the merchants would arrive in vast numbers, bringing with them their day's earnings and looking to wash away the dirt of that day's trading. At this early hour, the place looked relatively empty. At the far end of the barroom, separated from the rest of the clientele by a thin, intricately carved wooden screen depicting frolicking elves having a party, was a single gambling table. The table was large enough to seat 8 people around it, though it was currently only occupied by 6. Jorvis was one of the 6. Reyes had finally found him. Jorvis was dressed in reasonably high-quality clothing, trying to sell the illusion that he was a fairly well-off civilian, perhaps even a rich merchant. He had chosen his seat well, for although the positioning of the wooden screen blocked his view from the rest of the barroom and the entrance to the tavern, he could see anyone who took a seat at the bar or anyone who stepped around the screen. He had also positioned himself so that his back was to the wall. The other players at the table were all true elves. They were playing some sort of card game. Reyes had played a lot of cards with his sister when growing up, but he neither recognised the game or even the cards they were using. Reyes approached the gaming table, partly in the hope of attracting Jorvis's attention, but also in part because he was interested in how the game worked. Each player had 7 cards in his hand. There was also a large stack of cards lying face down on the table between them next to a small stack of money. The players were taking it in turn to select a card and then throw a card. From what Reyes could see, the next player could take the card that the previous player had thrown only if he was willing to add a coin to the pot. Standing where he was, Reyes had a clear view of one of the elves' hands. He saw 3 cards with the elven hieroglyph for Emperor in that elf's hand and wondered if they were any good in the context of this particular game. It never occurred to Reyes that he might be making the elf nervous. The elf stood up, scraping the chair noisily as he did so. He turned to face Reyes. "Hey," he said angrily, waving his hand threateningly. "Stop looking at my cards. Go away." Startled, Reyes looked at the elf. He still felt a little shaky when it came to the Elvish language, but he understood enough to get the gist of what the man had said. For a moment he felt tempted to stand his ground, but decided fairly quickly that nothing would be served by causing trouble. Reyes backed away slowly and found a stool over by the bar. He felt it was a safe distance from the game, and from here he could still see Jorvis. "Yeah," the elf said, his voice full of bravado as Reyes backed away. "I know how to handle your kind." "Calm down," Jorvis told the elf. "Let's get on with the tapping game." "Calm down," the elf spat. "If I lose this hand it'll be all her fault." "Look again. Look at the tapping wings," Jorvis suggested. "That's not just a tapping harpy, it's a tapping male." "So what?" The elf didn't seem even slightly impressed. "So," Jorvis replied, assuming he didn't just take your tapping part himself, males rarely travel anywhere without a couple of female tapping bodyguards in tapping shouting distance. You might not see them in the tapping inn, but believe me, harpies can hear them quite a tapping way away. "I heard that," agreed one of the other elves at the table. "If he wanted to, he could sit right across the barroom and still hear every word we said as clearly as if he was sitting next to you." "And then," Jorvis continued, "assuming you did somehow get the better of him and his tapping bodyguards, you'd have his entire tapping village to deal with. Or did you think they'd just let it tapping go?" "The Emperor isn't likely to be too happy with you for weakening his armed forces either," commented another elf. "Hey," the angry elf said, "I never meant to suggest I'd kill him. I just don't want him looking over my shoulder while I play." "Well, he's sitting tapping down there now. Let's play the tapping game," Jorvis said reasonably. "And then maybe I'll go and see what the tapping creature wants." "Friend of yours?" one of the other elves joked. "Acquaintance," Jorvis replied. "I do a little bit of business with the tapping harpies from time to time, and I think that maybe he's come to request something special for my next visit to his tapping village. He'd probably want something tapping shiny for one of his tapping girls. You know what tapping harpies are like. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if that's why he seems to be a tapping lone right now." "I don't know why you do any business for those things," the angry elf commented, emphasizing his apparent disgust. "Money is tapping money," Jorvis replied simply. There was an almost imperceptible shrug of his shoulders. The angry elf sat back down and picked up his cards. "Whose turn was it?" Slowly, the hand played out. Reyes was still no clearer on how this game was played as the last card was taken than he had been earlier. The angry elf had kept hold of the Emperor cards though, so perhaps they did have value in this game. The winner of the hand was the elf to Jorvis's left. To Reyes, it looked like the man had a mismatched jumble of rubbish. An emperor, a king, a queen, a mage advisor, a courtier, a king's mistress, and a court jester. "So you had one of my missing emperors," the angry elf commented. Then, spinning round in his chair to look at Reyes, he cursed. "Damned harpy! He lost me the game. Shattered my concentration." He stood up again and faced Reyes. "I ought to—" "Sit down," Jorvis insisted. "Let me tapping deal with him. I'll find out what he tapping wants and I'll get him to tapping leave." "Fine," the elf spat again, and then he sat back down. "I won't be tapping long," Jorvis said, rising from the table. Jorvis came over to where Reyes sat, saying, "This better be good, I was on a winning streak." "So I saw," Reyes said sarcastically. "How much have you lost?" "The money isn't important. People are more likely to tell you things when you play games with them," Jorvis said simply. He took the stool next to Reyes and said, I wasn't expecting to see you for another couple of weeks yet." Reyes was about to speak when he suddenly became aware that someone else was in easy listening distance. When Reyes glanced round, he saw that the barman was hovering close nearby. "Can we go somewhere more secure?" Over the month since his arrival in Goldspawn, Reyes had learnt that the reason Jorvis didn't seem to care when he spoke Flourish with no regard to who might overhear him was because there were so many different races in the city. It wasn't unusual to hear a multitude of languages being spoken. The elves themselves had 4 different languages. Even if someone should recognise that it was Flourish being spoken, few would be willing to report it to the authorities for fear of attracting unwanted attention to themselves. And nevertheless, the proximity of the barman made Reyes a little nervous. Jorvis glanced at the barman. "We'll have 2 tupping beers, please." Then, as the barman was busy fetching the drinks, Jorvis commented to Reyes, "He just wanted you to buy something. I saw him hovering near you as soon after you sat down over here. I don't think he meant you any harm, but he does have a business to run." "I don't really drink beer," Reyes protested. He couldn't help thinking that since he was naked, except for his black leather skirt, it should have been clear to the barman that he wasn't carrying any money. "Not elven beer, anyway." "Good," Jorvis replied. "Always remember the cardinal rule of elven food. Feel free to order it, but never, ever touch it. Beer should be safe though, it's an exact measure, so they can't give you more than you buy." Once the barman had served the drinks, and Jorvis had paid him for them, the spy jumped off his bar stool, and taking one of the beers, he led Reyes over to a quieter part of the barroom. "Oh, what's up?" Jorvis commented as he took a seat at the table, again with his back to the wall so that he could see most of the rest of the inn. The drunk was still snoring his head off near the fireplace, and the young lovers had left shortly after Reyes had entered the tavern, maybe even because he had entered the tavern. Reyes sighed. It wasn't something he wanted to admit, but he felt it was something Jorvis had to know. "Against my own better judgment, I've been convinced to join the Hope today." "Now, I warned you what the Hope was all about," Jorvis replied sternly. "My girlfriend is joining them. I have the choice of being alone for the rest of my life, or joining her." "That's not really much of a choice," Jorvis commented. "Nor will it be much of a life." "I know," Reyes replied. "I don't really want to do it, but I love her. I can't let her go in alone." "I can't see what you find attractive about her myself," Jorvis said. "But I guess each to their own. You probably don't find human women all that attractive." "I don't," Reyes admitted. "Besides, if there is going to be an invasion of Florif, I might be able to serve my family better if I'm actually a part of the army. It will certainly give me a way back into my home country." "I suppose so," Jorvis responded. "But, I mean, the Hope." "It does mean I won't be able to get away to find you so often. The Hope is quite probably the worst disciplined army I've ever seen. But I don't know when I'll have the opportunity to get away," Reyes explained. "Gagaru is rather attached to me, and since she's going to be in the same compound as her mother, I'll no longer—" Jorvis nodded and interrupted with, "Our visits weren't going to last forever, anyway." "Oh? How do you mean?" Reyes asked. "I've been hearing rumours. I've heard that Dubra is preparing a vast fleet as part of the invasion force. I may have to go and see for myself. Sir Richmond will want eyes on the fleet before he'll be willing to accept it as gospel, and we don't currently have anyone in that part of the Empire. Dubra has never really been thought of as a serious threat until now." "I'd hate to lose you as a friend," Reyes said, "but you have to go where you're sent." "Indeed," Jorvis agreed. "I hope there'll be a time where—" Jorvis was suddenly very quiet. Then he started talking about something totally unrelated, switching to Elistran as he did so. "What you tupping harpies have to realise is the tupping value of armour. True, you're strong. True, you can tupping fly. But you have nothing to protect you from your tupping enemies. Harpies have their value in battle. I'm not saying they tupping don't, but—" Jorvis continued talking about the virtues of armour versus the harpy. Reyes suddenly became aware that he was doing it for the benefit of an audience. The only reason Jorvis would get nervous enough to switch to Elvish was if that audience should happen to consist of soldiers. Reyes glanced around quickly and saw a group of 5 figures taking seats at the table next to theirs. They were dressed in the bright blue uniforms of the Elistran regular army. Those uniforms were quite beautiful in their way. They had gold braid on the pockets and buttonholes. Each soldier also had a small package sitting on his shoulder. If what Reyes had heard was true, that was where the soldier kept a small dose of a certain addictive drug. The drug was supposed to dull the pain centres of the brain and make the soldier think that he was invincible. Some of the rumours Reyes had heard about the drugs suggested that the taker would fight like a mad thing, having no care for his own well-being. 4 of the soldiers were chatting happily to each other. They paid neither Reyes nor Jorvis any mind. The 5th, on the other hand, although he too was joining in with the conversation, kept looking directly in Reyes' direction. There was definitely hatred in his eyes. "You see what I tapping mean?" Jorvis was still talking. "Now, obviously, I don't keep any tapping armour suitable for the use of tapping harpies in stock, but I'm sure I can tapping make some specially for you if you're really interested. I'll have to organise a proper sitting so you can be measured," and Reyes got the message. He turned his attention away from the 5 soldiers and commented, "I don't think I can afford a full set of armour. Besides, wouldn't it stop me from being able to fly?" "I could make some tapping wing holes in the back," Jorvis offered. "That would mean my wings wouldn't be protected," Reyes complained. "But the rest of you tipping would be," Jorvis commented. "I need my wings," Reyes explained. "I used to love this city," the elf that couldn't keep his eyes off of Reyes suddenly said. He was talking to his friends, but speaking loud enough for Reyes to have heard, even if he hadn't had superior harpy hearing. "Then they let her kind in. Now they're serving these creatures at my favourite inn. What next?" "Leave it out, Reyes," one of the other elves commented. "You don't like harpies. We get it, okay?" "Yeah," commented a second. "I'm sure some of them think the same way about you." "Besides," mentioned a third, "I think that's a male. It's a he, not a she." "Whatever," Reyes muttered loudly. "Like I could tell the difference. I've heard that the male's reproductive organ is tiny. That's why they're usually naked. They have nothing to hide." "I'll bet he's had more women than you," joked his friend. Reyes commented across the table. "If he's trying to bait me, he's not doing a very good job." "Maybe you should go anyway," Jorvis replied. "We don't want any trouble. It'll only attract the wrong sort of attention." "Harpy women don't count," Reyes commented disgustedly. "I mean, seriously, would you?" "I wouldn't," his friend agreed, still laughing. Reyes stood up from his chair and in little more than a whisper said, "Well, hopefully I'll see you a couple more times before you do leave. In the meantime, though, I still have to go and collect my things before I sign up." Jorvis nodded. "Good luck to you and your tupping girls." "Oh, look," the one called Reyes said loudly. "The thing is leaving." Then acting a little ashamed, he added, "Was it something I said?" "Somehow I doubt it," one of his friends commented. "Your insults aren't really all that good," another said. "Though, to be fair," added yet another, "no one likes getting heckled when they're trying to have a quiet drink." "Oh," Reyes leaned over the table and kept his voice low. "Before I go, was there any news from my family?" "Nothing new," Jorvis replied. "I haven't had an excuse to leave the city since we last chatted." "Leave the city?" Reyes asked. "Yes," Jorvis replied. "There's some kind of magical field around the city, so I have to leave whenever I want to communicate with home. Anyway, I told you about your sister getting married during the month of Remula, didn't I?" "Yes," Reyes replied. "The 17th, I believe. You also told me that each duke in the kingdom was insisting on bringing a small army with them because of what happened to Ducalis." Jorvis nodded. He then got out of his chair and agreed. "That was the last thing I'd heard. I'd better get back to the game. I hope we do get a chance to chat again before I leave." Then, without another word, he left Reyes where he stood and returned to his card game.